at my son's engagement. His father gave him the deed to the apartment, the same one I paid $30,000 to keep. And I stood there, frozen. Everyone cheered. No one looked at me. My name is Mary Morris, and I want to tell you about my older sister, Jane Morris. She's 68 now. One of those quiet women who gets up every morning, makes her tea, folds the newspaper before she reads it. Always dependable. Always strong. Jane raised her son, Kelvin, by herself in Asheville, North Carolina after her divorce. She had no help, no backup, no safety net. Just her and Kelvin in a rented duplex with thin walls and a busted heater for most of his childhood. Their story should have ended with respect, maybe a little peace. Instead, it ended with her being erased in front of a crowd. Jane worked hard her whole life. Real hard. She ran a small medical clinic for years and took weekend cleaning jobs just to keep food on the table. Her ex-husband, Leonard, disappeared shortly after Kelvin turned 10. One minute he was promising to send money, the next minute, nothing. No birthday cards, no child support, just silence. Kelvin didn't ask many questions. Jane didn't offer many answers. She just kept going. When Kelvin graduated college, he didn't have much money. Jane didn't either, but she wanted him to start off better than she did. So she bought a 2-bedroom apartment, not in a fancy area, but close to his job. It needed work. The roof had been patched too many times. The wiring was old, but the bones were good. She told Kelvin, "Stay here. Get your feet under you. You don't have to pay rent for now." He said thank you. That was it. He moved in, treated it like it was his, and Jane let him. She didn't want him to feel like a tenant. She wanted him to feel like he belonged. For a while, things were smooth. Jane kept the bills paid. The property taxes were manageable, but then came the back assessments. A notice showed up in the mail one summer, $26,000 in city fines and overdue taxes, plus mandatory repairs for electrical and water compliance. Jane sat in my kitchen with the letter in her hands, her lips tight. "What are you going to do?" I asked. She said, "I'll take money from my pension and a bit from my savings. Kelvin doesn't need this stress. He's trying to get his business off the ground." A month later, she cut a $30,000 check. Quietly. No ceremony. No thanks expected. Later, when I asked why she didn't at least tell Kelvin about it, she said, "It's his home, Mary. I wanted it to stay that way." The funny part, her name wasn't even the only one on the deed. Years earlier, when she first bought the apartment, she'd added Leonard as a co-owner because she couldn't qualify for the mortgage alone. He had the credit. He signed once, never paid a cent, and disappeared again. She kept the paperwork filed, the taxes paid, and the place afloat, all on her own. Kelvin never brought Leonard up much until about 3 years ago. That's when Leonard started popping up again. A phone call here, a birthday text there, then a surprise visit, then a dinner. Jane wasn't thrilled, but she didn't stop it either. "He's curious about his father. She told me, let him be." I should have known something was coming the moment Leonard offered to help plan Kelvin's engagement party. Jane wasn't invited to the tasting. She wasn't asked about the guest list, but she still got her nails done and bought a new dress for the big day. Said it wasn't about her anyway. The party was held at a banquet hall, all soft lighting and folded napkins. About 70 guests, people from both sides of Dara's family, Kelvin's fiancé, and a whole bunch I didn't recognize. Jane sat with me, and another cousin near the back. She smiled the whole night, said hello to everyone, even shook Leonard's hand when he came over, and said, "Glad you could make it." And then came the speech. Leonard stood up with a wine glass in his hand, gave a few jokes, told the story of how he used to rock baby Kelvin to sleep. People laughed. Dara wiped tears from her eyes. Then Leonard reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. "I want to give my son something that will help him start his new life," he said. "It's the deed to the apartment downtown. It's yours now, son. Free and clear." The room exploded in applause. Kelvin looked stunned. Dara gasped. Someone yelled, "That's incredible!" Jane didn't clap. She just sat there, hands folded in her lap, blinking slowly. I leaned in and whispered, "Is that the apartment?" She nodded. "He gave it to him?" I asked. She nodded again. No one looked at her. No one asked how it was possible. No one thought to say, "Wait, wasn't Jane the one who paid for all that?" And that was the moment I saw something break in her. Not anger, not jealousy, just silence. The kind of silence that comes when you realize the people you sacrificed everything for will never see you fully, not even in a room full of witnesses. That night was supposed to be a celebration. But for Jane, it was the day her generosity was handed off like it never existed. And that was only the beginning. I remember the day Leonard left like it was yesterday. Jane came home from work, holding a grocery bag in one hand and the mail in the other. She looked tired, but that wasn't new. What was new was the silence. No note, no phone call. Just gone. Kelvin was 10. Jane didn't cry, at least not in front of me. She just kept moving. That was her way. Bills didn't stop coming, and a growing boy doesn't wait around for feelings to get sorted. She went from working full-time at a small medical clinic to picking up weekend work cleaning houses. Not fancy ones either, the kinds where people barely noticed her. She never complained. She'd leave the house at 6:30 in the morning, come home after dark. Sometimes she'd still be in her scrubs, wiping her hands on a dish towel while checking Kelvin's homework. If she was tired, she didn't say it. If she was scared, she kept it to herself. Money was always tight, but she stretched every dollar. I remember her saying, "He'll have better than I did." And she meant it. Kelvin never missed a school trip. He always had lunch packed, shoes that fit, and gas in the car to get to baseball practice. Jane made sure of that. Years later, when he got accepted to college, Jane sat at my kitchen table with her calculator and a notepad. She didn't want him drowning in student loans. That's when she decided to buy a place. Not for her, for him. The apartment wasn't much. A second-floor unit in a 3-story brick building that needed more help than it looked from the outside. The wiring was old, the windows stuck, and the plumbing made noises. But it was close to campus, and the price was just low enough that she could afford it, barely. She'd saved up for years. A little from her paychecks, a little from her tax refunds. She even borrowed a small amount from her 401k. But her credit wasn't strong enough on its own, so she did what she had to, asked Leonard, her ex-husband, to co-sign. He agreed without much thought. He didn't put in any money, just signed the papers and disappeared again. Kelvin moved in right after graduation. Jane handed him the keys with a smile and said, "Make it yours." He did. Painted the walls, hung shelves, had friends over. He didn't ask questions. Just figured everything was fine. And for a while it was. But 3 years in, Jane got a letter from the city. The building had been flagged. Unsafe wiring, roof damage, unpaid assessments from the last owner. The total came to just under $30,000. Jane showed me the notice, sat at my dining table in silence. "I can't let Kelvin lose the place," she said. I told her she didn't have to fix it alone. But she already had a plan. She pulled from her pension, closed out one of her savings accounts, and called a contractor the next day. She didn't ask Leonard. She didn't tell Kelvin. She just handled it. That's the thing about Jane. She doesn't believe in making a scene. She believes in getting it done. Kelvin didn't know about the repairs. He didn't know the wiring was replaced or that the roof was sealed in the middle of hurricane season. He didn't know his mother had handed over $30,000 to keep that apartment safe and legal. And Jane didn't tell him. He once thanked her, in passing, for setting things up. She just nodded and smiled. That was enough for her. But I knew. I knew she was the reason that place was still standing. I knew the quiet meals she skipped so she could pay off a bill early. I knew how many weekends she spent working at houses where her name didn't matter. I once asked her, "Don't you want him to know what you've done?" She said, "No, I just want him to live well, and maybe one day respect where it came from." That word, respect, it mattered more to Jane than anything. Not praise, not thanks, just the feeling that her sacrifices weren't invisible. But the truth is they were, at least to the people who should have noticed most. And that's why that night at the engagement party stung the way it did. Not because Leonard gave the apartment to Kelvin, but because no one knew or cared that Jane was the one who made it possible in the first place. She was the one who held it all together. And when the moment came to be seen, she was left out of the picture entirely. Leonard had been gone for 25 years. No birthdays, no holidays, no child support checks, nothing but a few voicemails in the early years that led nowhere. He left Jane to raise Kelvin alone, and she did it without ever chasing after him. But all of a sudden, there he was. It started when Kelvin got promoted. He was doing well at a small marketing firm in Asheville, managing a team, getting good bonuses. Jane and I were proud. She even baked him a pie to celebrate. Then Kelvin mentioned a message from Leonard. Dad reached out. He said over dinner one night. He heard about my promotion. Somehow, said he wanted to talk. Jane looked down at her plate. She didn't ask how. She just said, "That's up to you." A week later, Leonard was in town. He invited Kelvin out for coffee, then lunch, then a weekend hike. Next thing we knew, he was showing up at family birthdays, bringing gift bags and stories from the old days, like he'd just been around the corner all this time. I saw the shift in Jane's face. It wasn't anger. It was more like a quiet sadness. She'd built every piece of Kelvin's life, paid the bills, stayed up with him when he was sick, drove him to college tours, bought that apartment. But now, Leonard was getting the spotlight because he happened to show up after decades of silence. Kelvin, for his part, was over the moon. He was like a little boy again, laughing at Leonard's jokes, hanging on to every story about their family tree. I can't blame him. A part of him had always hoped his father would come back and be proud of him. Now that it was happening, he didn't stop to ask why. Leonard played the role well. He wore crisp button-down shirts, always brought wine or pastries when he visited, told everyone he was in real estate consulting, though none of us were clear what that meant. Still, he said the right things, and people listened. Then came the engagement. Kelvin called Jane one morning. "Giddy, I proposed to Dara last night." She said yes. Jane's face lit up. She clutched the phone to her chest for a moment after the call ended. Then she turned to me and said, "He's happy. That's what matters." But that happiness came with a price. From the start, Leonard inserted himself into the wedding plans. He told Kelvin he had contacts and could help with venues, catering, everything. At first, Jane didn't say a word. She stepped back and let them take the reins. But I saw it, how she started being left out of things slowly. One afternoon, she said to me, "They're touring venues tomorrow. I just found out from Facebook." I asked, "Did you ask Kelvin about it?" She shook her head. "No need. He said Leonard's handling that part. He knows more people, apparently." It happened again and again. Cake tasting? Leonard's there. Rehearsal dinner plans? Leonard booked it. Jane wasn't even asked about her opinion on the guest list. Everything was filtered through Leonard. I watched her fold the invitation when it came in the mail. She didn't even open it right away. "Do you feel like a guest at your own son's wedding?" I asked her one evening. She smiled faintly. "It's not about me." But behind that quiet answer, something had shifted. Jane had never asked for praise, but being pushed out like she didn't matter, that stung. She started pulling papers from her file cabinet. Tax records, contractor receipts, bank transfers. She showed me one with a circle drawn in pen, $29,685.42. Check cleared. "This is what I used to save that apartment," she said, eyes steady, "in case anyone asks." It wasn't a threat. It was a record. A way of saying, "I was here. I did this." I knew she didn't plan to say anything at the party. That wasn't her style. But something inside her knew that if this kept going, if Leonard kept rewriting the story, then one day, even Kelvin might forget where the help came from. Jane didn't want revenge. She wanted the truth to have a place, even if no one was looking for it. So she saved everything, quietly, carefully, while Leonard played proud father of the year and stood in rooms built on work he never did. Jane called me the day the invitation came in. Her voice was flat. "Mary, my name's not even on it." I paused. "What do you mean?" She read it aloud. "Hosted by Leonard and Susan Morris in honor of their son, Kelvin, and his bride-to-be, Dara." That's it. Susan was Leonard's second wife, the one he married about a decade ago, long after he walked away from Jane and Kelvin. They'd never been close. Kelvin knew her, but never called her Mom. But there she was, listed front and center on his invitation, while Jane's name was nowhere in sight. Jane sighed. "I raised that boy. I packed his school lunches. I worked nights to pay for his books. And now I'm not even listed as his mother." If you've ever poured your whole heart into someone and then been left out of the picture, click like. It's the only way stories like Jane's stop being invisible. She said she wasn't sure she should go. I told her, "You're going. You raised that boy, Jane. You've earned the front row, whether they write your name on the card or not." It took her a few days to decide. I don't think it was pride. I think it was pain. She didn't want to show up and feel like a stranger at her own son's celebration. But in the end, she chose to go. She said, "I need to see it for myself. Maybe it won't be as bad as it feels." She wore a soft blue dress, one she'd had for years. Simple but neat. Her hair was pulled back, and she wore a pair of earrings I hadn't seen in a long time. She looked calm, composed, but her eyes told a different story. The engagement party was held at a rented venue in Durham. Big open hall, white tablecloths, strings of lights wrapped around indoor trees. It was tasteful, expensive looking, the kind of space that makes people whisper about the catering cost. Jane and I arrived a few minutes early. The woman at the front barely glanced at the guest list before waving us in. Inside, there were about 60 people, some from Dara's side, some from Leonard's. Jane and I found a spot near the back. We sat for 10 minutes before anyone said hello. Susan walked past once, nodded vaguely. No small talk, no welcome. She spent most of the evening huddled near Dara's parents, laughing like she'd known them for years. Jane stayed quiet. She sipped her iced tea and smiled politely at people who didn't recognize her. She watched Kelvin bounce between tables, hugging relatives, thanking guests. He looked happy, and Jane, for a moment, looked proud. "I think he's really in love," she said softly. "He looks it," I replied. Kelvin came over halfway through the party. He hugged Jane quickly, kissed her cheek. "Thanks for coming, Mom." She smiled. "Wouldn't miss it." He turned to me. "Hi, Aunt Mary. You look great." Then he was off again, pulled into a conversation near the bar. It wasn't rude. It was just quick, like we were another stop on his list of to-dos. Jane turned back toward the main room and watched him laugh with Leonard. They clinked glasses like old friends. The rest of the night moved like that. People mingled, music played softly, waiters carried trays of appetizers. Jane barely moved from her chair. No one invited her into the photo booth. She wasn't called to take a picture with the couple, but still she didn't complain. "He looks healthy, confident," she whispered once. I looked at her, trying to read her face. She didn't seem bitter, just tired, like someone holding back more than she wanted to. Then Leonard stood up and tapped his glass. The room hushed immediately. He smiled wide, holding a wine glass in one hand and an envelope in the other. "If I could have your attention for just a minute," he said, "I'd like to say a few words." Jane straightened in her seat. I glanced at her. She looked calm, but her hands were clasped tightly in her lap. Leonard started in with his usual charm. He talked about how proud he was of Kelvin, how lucky he felt to watch him grow into such a responsible man. He told a short story about a camping trip from years ago. People laughed. Dara dabbed at her eyes. Then Leonard held up the envelope. "I wanted to give my son a gift, something to help him and Dara start off right. This," he waved the envelope, "is the deed to the downtown apartment. It's theirs now." Applause erupted. Kelvin looked shocked. Dara gasped. Leonard walked over and handed him the envelope with both hands, like he was passing down something sacred. I turned to Jane. Her expression didn't change. No tears, no movement. But I knew. I knew what that envelope meant, and I knew what it cost her to sit there and say nothing, because she wasn't just watching a gift exchange. She was watching years of sacrifice get passed off as someone else's generosity. If that moment hit you in the gut too, share this video right now. Someone you know needs to hear that they're not the only one who's ever been pushed aside quietly. Leonard raised his glass and smiled like he'd been there all along. "I know I wasn't always the perfect father," he said, pacing slowly in front of the crowd. "Life took me in different directions. I made mistakes, but the one thing I never stopped doing was loving my son." People nodded. Some clapped quietly. Jane sat still beside me, holding her glass with both hands. Her fingers were tight around the stem. I could see a small shake in them. Leonard kept going, watching Kelvin grow into the man he is now, smart, hardworking, kind. "It's the greatest joy of my life." And now, as he prepares to build a future with Dara, I wanted to do something to help him start off strong. That's when he held up the envelope. "This," he said, "is the deed to the apartment downtown. The one you've been living in, son. It's yours now." A wave of gasps and cheers filled the room. Dara reached for a napkin, dabbing her eyes. People clapped louder. Kelvin stood frozen for a second, then walked over to Leonard, hugged him hard. "Thanks, Dad," he said. "I don't deserve this." Leonard clapped him on the back. "You've earned it." I looked at Jane. Her lips didn't move. Her eyes didn't blink. She just sat there, wine glass inches from her mouth, like her brain was trying to catch up to what her ears just heard. Someone behind us whispered, "What a generous father." That was the moment Jane almost dropped her glass. I heard it tap gently against the edge of the table, just enough to make her set it down. She looked across the room at Kelvin, holding the envelope. She didn't need to read it. She already knew what was inside. She knew those documents. She'd handled them herself. She'd walked the payment into the office. She'd gotten the receipt stamped. She had every copy filed in her drawer back home. That apartment wasn't Leonard's to give. When she bought it, Leonard's name was added only because her credit wasn't enough on its own. She'd made the down payment, covered every tax, and repaired the foundation when it cracked. Later, when the back taxes hit and the place was nearly seized, it was her check, just under $30,000. That saved it. She'd asked Leonard to sign one form for legal convenience, and that was it. He didn't pay for that apartment. He hadn't even visited it. But now, in front of everyone, he was handing it over like it had come from his pocket. Jane didn't say a word. She didn't stand up. She didn't correct him. She didn't explain. She just sat there, hands folded, eyes on her son. The applause slowed. Music picked up again. People lined up to hug Kelvin and Dara. Glasses clinked. A few folks passed our table without stopping. Kelvin looked toward us once, made eye contact for maybe a second. Then he was swept away into a photo with Leonard, Dara, and her parents. Jane pushed her chair back gently. I looked at her. You okay? She nodded once. You want to stay? No, she said. I've seen enough. We walked out quietly. No one called after us. No one noticed we were leaving. The parking lot was quiet, the air thick with early summer heat. Jane didn't speak as we got in the car. She just drove, hands steady on the wheel, eyes straight ahead. About 20 minutes down the road, I finally asked, "Do you want to talk about it?" She shook her head. Not now. So we rode the rest of the way in silence. When we got to her house, she stepped inside, kicked off her shoes, and walked straight to her filing cabinet. I followed, but didn't say anything. She opened the top drawer and pulled out a manila folder. Inside were copies of every major expense tied to that apartment. The mortgage agreement, the renovation contracts, the property tax letters, and right on top, her bank transfer receipt from the day she cleared the back taxes, nearly 30 grand. She slid it across the table toward me. In case something comes up, she said. I looked at her. You're not going to say anything? She looked tired, not angry, not even surprised, just tired. I raised him to have a good life, she said quietly. I didn't raise him to erase me. But I guess that part's not in my control anymore. I nodded. Still, you deserve. I don't need praise, she cut in, but I won't be lied about. Not like that. She took the folder back, tucked it away. Then she walked into the kitchen and started boiling water for tea like it was any other evening. But I knew better. Something in Jane broke that night, not because she lost a piece of property, but because her son stood in a room full of people and let someone else take credit for her life's work. And he didn't blink. The next morning, I drove over to Jane's house. She was sitting on her porch, same spot she always sat after watering the plants. A mug in her hand. No radio. No book. Just silence. I walked up the steps and sat beside her. You sleep? She nodded. Some. Her voice was even, not cold, but settled, like someone who'd made up her mind and didn't plan on changing it. We sat like that for a few minutes before she spoke again. I've decided I won't fight it, she said. I just won't forget it. I didn't ask what she meant. I knew. She'd already packed away her pride the night before. What was left now was something sharper, quiet but pointed. Not revenge, not spite, just truth. Jane stood up, went inside, and came back with a folder in her hands. The same one I'd seen the night before. She opened it on the table and started sorting. Receipts, bank statements, tax notices. Every paper had her name on it. She lined them up like puzzle pieces. No yelling, no tears, just steady hands and a clear mind. This one shows the transfer, she said, pointing to a bank document. And this one proves the property was nearly foreclosed. This one's the contractor agreement for the wiring. I signed all of it. I watched her work through the file like she was preparing for an audit. Jane, I said finally, what are you planning to do? She didn't look up. I'm mailing it. To who? Dara's parents. That caught me off guard. Why them? She looked at me then. Because they're business people, small company owners, conservative with money. They'll know what these numbers mean. I sat back in my chair. You're sending it anonymously? She nodded. No return address. Just the documents in a plain envelope. What do you think they'll do? I don't know, she said, but if their daughter is walking into a marriage where the foundation is built on lies, they deserve to know. She didn't speak with bitterness. She wasn't trying to break anything up. She was just done pretending that what happened didn't matter. Leonard can give away the deed, she added, but not the truth. That part stays with me. She sealed the envelope and slipped it into her bag. She said she'd drop it off at a mailbox the next morning on her way to the grocery store. Nothing dramatic, just handled. You didn't yell, I said quietly. You didn't cry. I don't need to raise my voice, she answered. The truth speaks loud enough. I didn't say much after that. We sat in the backyard for a while, watching the wind pass through the trees. A few days went by, then a week. No calls, no emails, no knock on the door. Kelvin didn't check in. Leonard didn't follow up. It was like the party had erased everything before it. Jane didn't seem surprised. She watered her plants, paid her bills, and took her morning walks like always. But I saw the change. She used to keep photos of Kelvin on her hallway wall graduation day, his first job, a beach trip from years back. A few of them were gone now. Not all, but some. She wasn't angry, just clearing space. Another week passed. Still nothing. I asked her once if she regretted mailing the documents. She shook her head. No. If they throw it out, fine. But if it makes one person stop and ask a question, it's enough. It wasn't about getting credit anymore. It was about not letting the lie live unchallenged. That was Jane's way. She didn't take anything from Leonard. But somehow he took everything that mattered from her. And she wasn't going to let that go unnoticed. It was a Sunday afternoon when it happened. Jane had just come back from the farmer's market. She was in the kitchen putting tomatoes into a bowl when someone knocked on the front door. Not hard, just 2 light taps. She thought it might be a neighbor, but when she opened the door, it was Dara. She was alone. No car idling out front. No smile on her face. Just standing there, holding a plain white envelope against her chest like she wasn't sure whether to be angry or ashamed. Jane stepped aside. You want to come in? Dara nodded. They sat in the living room, both quiet for a minute. Dara looked around the room like she was seeing Jane's life for the first time, framed family photos, books stacked on the end table, the plant that had grown around the window frame. Then she spoke. I had no idea, Dara said, her voice soft. I thought Leonard owned that place. I thought he was just giving Kelvin something he'd built for him. She looked at Jane. I didn't know what you did. Jane didn't say anything at first. She waited. Dara held out the envelope. These came in the mail. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting. It was your notes on the receipts. Jane gave a slow nod. I didn't mean to hide anything. I just wanted you to have the full picture. Dara's eyes welled up. He didn't tell me. None of it. Not about the taxes. Not about the repairs. He just acted like Leonard had done it all. When I asked a few small questions, he brushed it off like I was worrying too much. Jane stayed calm. You have the right to ask questions, she said. Before you promise your life to someone, you need to know what's underneath everything. Dara nodded. I feel like I walked into a story midway, and nobody wanted me to read the beginning. Jane didn't speak into the silence that followed. She knew better than to fill space that didn't need filling. I don't know what I'm going to do yet, Dara said. But I needed to come here. I needed to hear it from you. Jane leaned back in her chair. All I ever wanted was for Kelvin to start off right, but not like this. Not by stepping over the people who carried him. Dara swallowed. Thank you for being honest. Jane nodded again. Whatever happens, I hope you end up somewhere you feel safe and seen. They stood at the same time. At the door, Dara turned once more. I'm sorry you weren't given credit for what you did. Jane gave her a small smile. That's not your fault. Then she watched as Dara walked down the path and disappeared around the corner. A week later, I called Jane. I just got off the phone with someone. I said, Aunt Ramona. She heard from one of Dara's cousins. Jane stayed quiet. The wedding's been postponed. I said, indefinitely. Jane didn't say, good. She didn't gloat. She didn't even ask why. She just said, I hope Dara's okay. I asked her how she felt. She said, relieved mostly, not because of the wedding, but because someone finally saw what was real. And for the first time in weeks, her voice didn't sound tired. Weeks passed. No word from Kelvin. Not a call. Not a text. Not even a message asking if what Dara said was true. Jane waited at first, just in case. But by the third week, she stopped checking her phone in the mornings. It was clear he'd made his choice. Leonard must have spun his version of the story. Maybe Kelvin believed it. Maybe it was easier to believe than facing the truth. Jane didn't bother chasing him down. She said, if he wanted to hear from me, he knows where I live. But the sadness didn't stay. Something else took its place. She cleaned out her hallway closet, donated old jackets, packed away dishes she didn't use. She boxed up a few framed photos, ones she wasn't ready to toss, but didn't want to look at every day. Then she started looking at retirement condos in Charleston. She said she'd always liked the idea of being closer to the water. Warmer winters, quiet streets, new start. We drove down for a weekend to look at places. Jane wore her sun hat and flats and took notes like she was preparing for a test. She didn't talk much about Kelvin. She asked about HOA fees, neighborhood noise, and distance to the grocery store. On the last morning of the trip, we sat on a bench near the marina. Jane was sipping her coffee, looking out over the boats. She said, I thought losing his thanks would break me. But it didn't. What hurt worse was being erased like I never mattered. Then she added, but I know I did. And she meant it. That was the thing about Jane. She didn't need applause. She didn't want a plaque or a standing ovation. She just wanted her work, her love, to be seen. That's all any of us want, really. Some days, she still checks her mailbox hoping for a note. But most days, she waters her plants, calls her sister, and watches the news like everything is fine. She doesn't carry bitterness. She carries peace. And it fits her better. Jane may have lost her son's thanks, but she found something deeper, something stronger, and she never let the lie become louder than the truth. I'll end this story the way Jane would have wanted, with a little silence, a little honesty, and a little question for you. Have you ever done everything for someone, and they forgot the moment it counted? What would you do if it happened to you? Would you speak or stay silent like Jane did? Let us know in the comments. And if this story made you feel something, anything, please take a second to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your voice matters here, just like Jane's did. Thanks for watching.